We needed in this budget to find a balance between continuing to invest in Canadians, to invest in affordability for Canadians who are feeling the pinch of inflation right now.
The budget centerpiece is a one-time cost of living rebate worth $467 for couples with children, $234 for single Canadians, and an extra $225 for seniors. The government is calling it a grocery rebate, but you can spend it on anything you want. It will be paid out to 11 million Canadians. When? That's TBD.
Given the pressures that household budgets are under, I can imagine that any amount's going to be helpful.
The government also promises to lower credit card transaction fees for businesses and prohibit what it calls hidden junk fees that consumers pay. Things like roaming charges or surcharges for concert tickets, even excess baggage fees. Freeland also announced an expansion of what is now called the Canadian Dental Care Plan. That's a plan that had covered dental bills for children in lower-income households. Now, by the end of 2023, any uninsured person in a household earning less than $90,000 can get federal dental coverage. The government is also scaling back a planned tax hike on beer, wine, and spirits. The alcohol excise tax will now jump 2% on April the 1st, rather than 6.5%. Overall, new spending commitments total $43 billion over the next 5 years, and most of that is a result of increased health transfers to the provinces.
This is, I think, a bit of a pivot for this Liberal government. It's a relatively small budget.
The government says its budget plan is sustainable.
We know that fiscal responsibility matters. We know that maintaining Canada's AAA credit rating matters. We know that not adding fuel to the flames of inflation matters.
All right, David Akin is standing by. David, I know you spent the day going through this. What struck you most about what's in this budget?
Well, it's what Sahir Khan, our expert from the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy, was saying, was it's kind of a pivot from traditional Liberal budgets, at least traditional since the Trudeau government took over in 2015, in that there is not a lot of new spending programs. The only one that consumers are really going to notice is, as we've told you about, is this idea of a cost of living rebate. It's what the government calls a grocery rebate. That's all spin. You can spend it on anything you want, and you didn't even have to pay for any groceries last year to get it. So that is the big ticket item for consumers, and that's going to cost the government about $2.5 billion a year, and yet that's small enough it won't be inflationary. So and David, the smallness of it.
Can I just pick away at that for a sec? Is that targeted to certain? Is it means tested? Targeted to certain individuals?
It is means tested, Donna. You're right. So you need to have filed a tax return. I'm going to talk about that in a second too. You need to file a tax return, and if you are in a certain income bracket, low to low middle income, you're going to qualify for this one-time payout. We don't know when it's going to be paid out yet because the budget bill will have to clear Parliament. It almost certainly will do that because I think the NDP will find lots in this budget that they like. Big news on the dental plan, for instance. But yes, it's means tested. Now, the tax filing, you don't get many government benefits unless you file a tax return. And there are 2 million Canadians, most on the low income end of the scale, who don't file a tax return and as a result are missing out on all these government benefits. One of the things in this budget, it's sort of a process thing, but important, is to account for automatic tax filing. So even for those Canadians who may not have much income, they don't think they need to file a tax return, there's going to be a system set up for automatic tax filing that gets you on the tax rolls, and most importantly, that would qualify you then for this one-time payout, for the Canada Child Benefit, and any number of other government benefit forms. So there's a bit of reform on the tax filing front here.
Okay, and David, can I ask you about something else that was sort of telegraphed that was going to be in this budget, was a reduction in the amount of interest that payday loan companies can charge. Was that in here?
Well, you know what, Don, I've been around Parliament Hill for, I don't know, seems like a lifetime. It almost is, 25 odd years. And I didn't know today that in the criminal code, there is actually a criminal interest rate, believe it or not. I think it's like 47%. So that, if you charge someone 47% interest, that is apparently a criminal code offense. What the government is doing in this budget is lowering the criminal rate of interest, and they're bringing that down to 35%. I certainly hope to God, if you're forced to borrow something at 35%, you can find someone else to borrow from, but that will be the rate at which it becomes criminal to lend money to someone. So that's where they did on the payday loans.
Well, I
There's a
think
lot
that's
of little
important because there were a lot of anti-poverty advocates who were pushing
Yes.
for that, who said that these interest rates at payday loan companies are predatory, some say even criminal, because they are so high. And the people who rely on these payday loans, of course, are people who can't get traditional financing through a bank and need to pay their bills and need emergency funding. And so they're kind of have to rely on this. So,
And we talked about things that the NDP and Jagmeet Singh are going to point to and say, we did that. That would be one of them. They've been pounding away to do something about the payday loan industry and exploitation by the payday loan industry for some time now.
Mm-hmm. And what else, David? What about what else struck you that's not in here that perhaps you were expecting to see?
Things not in the budget. No real changes to your income tax rate, any tax rates. For the 70,000 Canadians who are super rich and pay what's called a alternative minimum tax, there is a bump. They're going to pay an alternative minimum tax instead of 15%, now 20%. But again, that is just 70,000 Canadians. So no tax cuts really for the rest of us. No adjustments to Canada Child Benefits, OAS, anything like that. And you know what also struck me on the housing front? I mean, we've heard a lot of governments at all levels talk about housing. We must do more about housing. Really not a whole lot in this particular budget on housing. You'd want to look to last year's budget to see what the federal government is doing on it. There is, in this budget, the federal government will be encouraging banks to adopt a code of conduct when it comes to lending. In other words, best practices that they'd like to see banks do a better job informing consumers, and in some cases will allow banks to increase an amortization rate beyond 25 years. What's the goal of that? Keep people's monthly payments the same or close to it, even if you have to extend the life of a loan. So some best practices for banks, no laws, no regulations, but it's sort of a nod to the fact that banks need to be more responsive to people who are coming and renegotiating mortgages at a time of rising interest rates.
And David, what is the finance minister saying about the prospect of recession in the next 12 months, which is what a lot of the Conference Board of Canada is anticipating, that a lot of economists are as well?
I don't think you'll hear the finance minister use the R word, the recession word, when she's talking about it. They'll talk about likely scenarios where economic growth is slowing. Economists we spoke to that were in the lockup are using the term a shallow recession. You've heard that before. And don't forget, a recession, when we talk about that, is 2 consecutive quarters, so 6 months in a row, of declining economic growth. But again, I think the consensus among economists is if we do have 2 consecutive quarters, it will be relatively shallow, minus 0.1%, minus 0.2%. It won't be that deep. But that's what they say. The government is anticipating slower economic growth. And as a result, that's why it's saying it's building in some affordability measures into its budget, the chief of which is its centerpiece. And that is that one-time rebate that it's billing as the grocery rebate, but which you can spend on anything you want.